Hello Horus Heresy fans, welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking all about the Emperor's Children. We're going to be reviewing their units, and we're also going to be talking about some tactics for using them in your games of Horus Heresy, the Age of Darkness. So this video is going to be quite a bit longer than usual, so please do use the YouTube chapters at the bottom of the video to skip around the content to the stuff that you would like to hear if you would like to do that. And also please don't forget to leave me a like or even subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content, and do leave me a comment if there's anything that you'd like to discuss or any questions or feedback you'd like to give me as well. That would be great. So, the Emperor's Children, the 3rd Legion. I really love the Emperor's Children, and I'm really excited to do this review because I'm not making an Emperor's Children army for myself, even though it is one of the paint schemes I'd love to paint. But I really enjoy talking about them because I think the rules for them are so interesting, and the way their armies work is so interesting. They've got a lot of synergies and a lot of stuff that works well, and they're quite unique in the way they work compared to other legions as well. Now, I'm not going to do a man reads book style thing for this video, so there's plenty of those on YouTube already, really good ones. I'm going to assume that you know the rules that we're talking about, so as we go through this. Alright, so let's start with their Legion rule. So their Legion rule is actually quite simple. It gives them the ability to strike at one initiative step higher in combat. When they've charged, it's called Flawless Execution. Now, note what that doesn't do is it doesn't give them +1 initiative, it just means they strike at one higher, which is super important because it applies after other rules have happened that modify your initiative. So the biggest use for this, for that particular part of the rule, is if you've got a Power Fist, Unwieldy reduces your initiative to 1, but then this rule means you strike at initiative step 2. So it means that you strike with your big hitty weapons before other people's big hitty weapons, which is just a absolutely huge advantage in combat, particularly if you've got similarly equipped units going toe-to-toe with each other. Likewise, just in general, what this means is, for the most part, when you're in a combat against a similar unit, you're going to be going first. Now, most things in the game do have initiative 4. It's pretty uniform across the game, so whatever your unit is, this rule normally means that if you've charged, you're going to strike first, except the odd few units that have like 1 point of higher initiative. But in that case, you would strike at the same time as them, so it's also still a really big advantage. So this rule is really good, really powerful and thematic as well for the Emperor's Children. Now, it does mean sometimes this rule isn't going to help you at all though. So, you know, if you're getting shot at or if you're shooting some guns, it doesn't do anything. If you get charged, which is going to happen as in any game, it also doesn't do anything. So there's lots of ways in which this rule doesn't help you. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, really. You know, it relies on you doing something to make it happen. So, you know, you have to factor that into the way you play, and you have to make sure you play in such a way as to maximize the use you get out of this rule, which is what we're going to be talking about through this video as it happens. There's a second part of this rule as well that lets vehicles get +1 to hit when defensive firing. Now, that's okay, fine. You know, it's not going to be super impactful when it does happen, and it doesn't actually happen very much because a lot of the time spending a reaction to Overwatch with a vehicle also isn't the best thing to do either. So not a big part of the rule, that. Let's also mention their advanced reaction as well while we're on blanket rules. So this is kind of a cool, interesting rule, but it's not very strong particularly. It's very thematic though. So when an enemy charges you, you can declare that you're going to do the perfect counter. You have to do that before they roll their charge roll. So they roll their charge roll, and you roll a charge roll as well. And if you beat them, you charge them instead, which is kind of cool and probably quite powerful when you can pull it off as well. It gives you the +1 attack instead of them getting the +1 attack. If you fail, you can just shoot them as you would with Overwatch. So kind of swingy. You know, a lot of the time you're just going to fail it and it's just going to be the same as Overwatch, and sometimes with some of your units you might even not have a weapon to Overwatch with, which is, you know, super unexciting as well. But when it does go off, it's really good. What I do think is the biggest problem for this is that you could just brace reaction instead, which makes the other person charge disordered, which means they all don't get their extra attack for charging. And the brace is probably better than the chance that you're going to get the charging most of the time. So a lot of the time you won't even want to use this because brace or just Overwatch, if you've got a unit with guns, would be better. That said, there are plenty of times when if this goes off, you'll really cause your opponent problems. You know, they're, like, let's say their big Terminator elite unit charging yours. They've got to be worried that instead of them getting +1 attack on the charge, you're going to get it instead, and then it triggers your +1 initiative as well. You know, which is the other thing that this does when you charge. So cool thing to have access to. Very thematic, very unusual and interesting to use as well. Although maybe not always the strongest, and you've got to be careful when you use that because it could be a bit of a gamble sometimes. You know, sometimes you will be better just bracing. Right, let's mention some of the Warlord traits. So 2 of their Warlord traits are very good, and they're both locked by loyalty as well. So the first is traitor only. Whenever anyone fails a morale check within 12 of your Warlord, you can sacrifice a model in that unit, basically. And, sorry, you don't sacrifice a model. A model in the unit takes a wound, and you auto pass the morale check instead. Now, this is really, really good. It's like the ultimate, my units can never fall back in combat even if they lose, because it's a morale check, right? They can never fall back in combat. They can never fall back from shooting if I don't want them to, at the cost of a wound. You know, if the unit is a Terminator unit, it's not even going to kill a model. It's just going to take a wound off them, and they're going to stay where they are. Cannot overstate how good that is. I think it's one of the best Warlord traits in the game, probably, is just knowing that your unit, even if it loses, isn't going to fall back, is so good, and interacts really well with some of the other rules we're going to talk about later. It also gives you, as part of the extra reaction that you get, it gives you a shooting reaction as well, which is generally the best kind of reaction too. So you're going to take that, I think, most of the time when you're playing traitors. On the flip side, for Loyalist Emperor's Children, which I think is quite a big thing, because a lot of people like to play Loyalist Emperor's Children, and that includes me, something I would really like to play. Martyrs of Istvan. So they get an extra assault reaction, which is also great, and they get +1 to hit traitors when they're locked in combat. And that's like well, not army-wide, but any traitors you're in combat with, +1 to hit. That's the character and the unit that is joined. Just blanket +1 to hit. It's awesome. It's really, really good. So you're already high weapon skill in this army a lot, and you're already very good in combat. And obviously, if you're playing, you know, a normal game, traitors versus heretics, you're always going to have this in combat. It's just huge. It's just really big. So that's also a good Warlord trait. Let's talk a little bit about their equipment as well. So the first equipment they get is something called Surgical Augment. So this is +20 points on any character. Obviously, that can include a sergeant in a unit as well. So you've got 3 options. You've got Sonic Shriekers. When you charge or are charged, the enemy gets -1 to hit in combat. Doesn't work on units that are immune to fear, which is quite uncommon. That's massive. So now when we charge someone, we're getting +1 initiative, and they're getting -1 to hit us when they strike back. And even if we get charged, we're still -1 to hit. This is just monster good for 20 points. Another one of the things that makes this army so good in combat. And I think any unit where you can take it that is destined for melee at all in the army, you just take this like every time. It's so good. It's really good. The second good one they've got is Sonic Lance. Now this is a template, Flamer template. Strength 2, Breaching 6, and Pinning. It's kind of weird. So it's Strength 2, which means you basically can't hurt anything that's more than Toughness 4. So it's pretty much just destined for killing Marines is all it's going to do. But because it's Breaching 6, anytime you do wound, because you're going to be wounded on a 6 anyway, you are going to go through their armor, and it's Pinning as well. So a Flamer template that, you know, you're probably going to get, against most units of 10, you're going to get 6 to 8 hits. You're probably going to kill 1 Marine and force a Pinning test. So this is potentially really good when you're going to charge a unit. You can force that Pinning test on them, and if they do fail it, it means they can't react when you charge. Now, you will unpin them when you charge, unfortunately, if you do charge them successfully, but it does mean you can skip them getting a reaction. This is also really good defensively as well. So likewise, if an opponent charges you, you're getting those nice Wall of Death, free hits, potentially causing a Pinning test. And if you do cause a Pinning test and they fail it, it means that their charge gets cancelled as well. So that's also kind of cool. The last thing that this is really good for is when you get to put it on multiple models in a unit, which some things do allow you to do, some of the special units and one of the Rites of War as well. And it means that when you put that on those units for like 20 points, 30 points, depending on what you're doing, you can get the whole unit with these, and all of a sudden you are really killing an awful lot of Space Marines, because even though the individual weapons aren't very good, you're throwing out so many templates, hitting so many things with that breach and power, you're actually going to start killing things as well as forcing that pin and test too. The last one is the Subsonic Pulsar, so this lets you ignore night fighting, both the BS and leadership penalties, which is less good, but you know, it affects the whole unit if you put it on a character, and if you are going to put it on like a unit of heavy weapons or something like that, that's kind of a nice upgrade, because quite a few of the scenarios do have night fighting in as well, so it's a nice thing to have access to, whilst maybe just not quite as powerful as the others. Emperor's Children also get access to Phoenix power weapons, so any character can exchange their power weapon for one of these for free. The Rapier is just a power sword with Murderous Strike, 6+, and it's a free upgrade, so that's great. It also makes it rather like interestingly good at killing Dreadnoughts. So if you got a power sword in combat and you hit a Dreadnought, you're going to need a 6 to wound anyway. And so every time you wound the Dreadnought, you're going to rend. So every time you roll a 6, you're going to rend, which means you're going to wound. Even if it's, well, regardless of what toughness it is, you're going to wound. You're going to breach its 2+ save, and you're going to do D3 damage to it because you've got instant death because of your Murderous Strike. So this is good. It's a nice free upgrade. It's cool. You've also got the Spear, which is a bit more different. So it's +3 strength and AP3, reach 1, which gives you +1 initiative. It's also murderous and breach and 6. Now it's a really good weapon. It doesn't have AP2 by default, and it only breaches on a 6, so when you have to fight things like Terminators or enemy characters, it loses a lot of its potency. And the Reach 1, whilst good, and it's never a bad thing to have +1 initiative, a lot of the time you're going to be going first anyway, so it can kind of be wasted in some circumstances as well, but still a very good weapon. You know, a very good weapon and worth having access to, absolutely. So then we also have a couple of special rules. Now these apply to more than one unit in the army. So we're just going to talk about the rules themselves. So the first is skill unmatched. So when you've got a unit or a model with this ability, they have to pick one of these at the start of the combat phase. May select one of these at the start of the combat phase. So Perfect Guard, you count as being one weapon skill higher when the enemy's trying to hit you. So basically the other person gets -1 to hit, larger most of the time, but you get -1 attack. There's also Perfect Strike, which gives you +1 weapon skill for attacking, but -1 attack. And then there's Perfect Fury, which gives you -1 weapon skill flat, but +1 attack. Now these are really interesting in the way that they work, and they are a bit mathematical, unfortunately, because that's just the inevitable result of something like this. But Perfect Guard makes the other person -1 to hit you, but gives you -1 attack. Now, on balance of things, generally, that means you come off worst off, because most of the things that have got this ability, the models are 2 attacks each or 3 on the charge, and losing your attacks is not worth the other person being -1 to hit, but it really depends on what they're doing as well. Like, if you get charged by, like, Red Butchers, for example, you know, if you're playing Loyalist Emperor's Children, they might be throwing 25 dice at you, and all of a sudden -1 to hit is worth you having 1 less attack, whereas against some units it won't be so much. So you really need to think about the way you're using these to try and figure out when to use them and when it's actually to your disadvantage. Likewise as well, if you're a weapon skill 5 unit with Perfect Guard fighting against weapon skill 4, they're already hitting you on a 5. Do you really need to reduce their attacks more? Like, if they're Space Marines and they've only got bayonets and they're not penetrating your armor, you probably don't need them to hit you less. But if they're hitting you with power weapons that do penetrate your armor, you might want to reduce the hits from 5s to 6s, which would be worth you losing one attack. Lots of things to think about here in when this is good versus when it's not. Perfect Strike, on the other hand, is a bit different. This is generally just a bad idea to do this. So it gives you +1 to hit, but you lose an attack. And the maths on that is much easier. Do you do more damage with an extra attack on every model or with +1 to hit? And almost all the time, the extra attack is going to be better. Obviously, if for some reason you had a unit with tons and tons of attacks, +1 to hit becomes better than the 1 attack, but the models used in this army don't. They tend to be 2 or 3 attacks each, and therefore losing 1 attack just leaves you worse off than the +1 to hit, regardless of what number you're hitting on. So Perfect Strike, actually a bit of a trap, and you probably shouldn't use it very often, which is a bit of a shame. Perfect Fury, on the other hand, is quite good. So for the same reasons Perfect Strike isn't very good, Perfect Fury is good, because the models tend to have a low number of attacks. Just having one more attack is generally better than having, -1 weapon skill. Now, this is only mostly true when you're going first, right? Because obviously the other person is getting +1 to hit you, and you're getting -1 to hit them in return for an attack. But if you're going first in a lot of situations, that might not be relevant because you just want to kill as many of them as possible before they go. So the fact they hit you better isn't too much of a problem. So again, depending on the number of attacks you've got, if you've already got quite a few attacks, having -1 to hit might be worse. But if someone's charged you and all your guys are only on 2 attacks each, having +1 attack is better than +1 to hit. So lots of maths to figure out in this one, which I'd be quite happy to go into for anyone who wants to understand the maths separately. If you're interested in that more, leave me a comment and I'll actually type the maths out for you. But I'll spare you from listening to maths in this episode. But really interested in these, and you should definitely, if you're going to play this army, spend a little bit of time figuring out versus the different kinds of units you might fight when these are a good idea and when they're not. The next one is Living Icons. That's the next ability. So this is really good. Any model with the Living Icons ability, all Emperor's Children within 6 get +1 to their combat results. Now that's really powerful, especially since it stacks with the Legion Vexilla. So that means if you've got like a tactical marine unit near a unit of Living Icons, that are going to be on +2 to their combat result, which is quite a lot. Fulgrim also has another +1, so in theory you could be on +3 to your combat results without even having to roll a dice. And this is where Perfect Guard becomes interesting, because if you can just sort of tank yourself up in a combat, and to the point where you don't really worry about killing the other person's stuff, you just make sure that they can't kill you as well, and you just win the combat on combat result alone a lot of the time, and you make the other person fall back and then you chase them down, for example. So that's kind of cool, interesting way of going about combats brought about by these different rules that they've got. So putting these rules together, there is a console upgrade called the Phoenix Warden that gets those 2 rules for 30 points, and he also gets to add a Phoenix Power Weapon for free, and he also gets an Iron Halo as well. So you take that console for 30 points, his invulnerable save goes up to a 4, he gets a Phoenix Power Weapon, maybe a spear or something like that, and those 2 rules. So he's given out this aura of +1 to hit, and he's pretty good in combat as well, so that's a cool thing. One of the Rites of War also requires you to take one of those as well, so it's nice that he's good. So let's go on to the units next. So first of all, we've got the Phoenix Terminators. Amazing models. Really love these guys. So they're 200 points for 5, which is cheap as elite Terminators go. They're weapon skill 5. They are stubborn. They have the skill Unmatched and Living Icons rules that we've just talked about. Now, they're in Tartaros Terminator armor, which generally is a bit worse than Cataphracti because you like that invulnerable save, but it does mean they can sweep and advance. And because Emperor's Children are very good at trying to win combats, that's a good thing, so you want that to be able to sweep through things. They also can be a retinue in a HQ, which is cool because it means they get to take a standard for 15 points, become line, grant that leadership 10 as well. And they also come with Phoenix Power Spears. So they're going to be strength 6 in combat, and they're going to have that breach and murderous strike on a 6 AP3. Now, the last thing they can do as well, which is also really good, is they can pay 25 points to take surgical augment on the whole unit. So a lot of the time, you're just going to want the Shriekers for the -1 to hit, which is, really good. But you could take the Sonic Lancers on them as well. And bear in mind, they don't come with any guns usually. So that's like extra good in some ways. So they can overwatch against things with those, or they can, charge, run around the battlefield and shoot things with them as assault weapons. Although if they're going to charge them anyway, they probably don't need the extra help. But you're going to take that augment almost every time on those, probably for the -1 to hit a lot of the time. And these are really good Terminators. They are not that well suited to killing opposing Terminators because they only have AP3. So even though they have got some murderous strike and breach in there, and they probably will, when they fight, get a couple of kills before the enemy goes using that, they're not going to wipe out whole enemy units, but that's kind of okay. You could just run them at the enemy Terminators and just kill a few of them, and when they hit you back, depending on what they're equipped with, you could probably still win the combat. But one of the main reasons you take these is for the big Living Icons bubble as well, which they do give to themselves too, with another +1 to the combat result. They're just good. They're not very expensive either. You know, when you stack them up against something like Just Aaron, the Just Aaron will probably win the combat, although not by much, because these will go first, and the Just Aaron have got better gear and an extra attack per model and that kind of stuff, but these are 75 points less, or 50 points less if you give them Sonic Shriekers, so they are very cheap for what you get for them, and I think you would play these. Don't think there's an Emperor's Children army you would play without these, especially because the models are so good. There's also Palatine Blades, which are a bit more unusual. They got a lot of overlap with the Phoenix Terminators, so they don't have the Living Icons rule, but they do have skill unmatched as well. They're 165 points for veteran Marines, so 2 wounds, 2 attacks each. They've got Artificer armor, their weapon skill and ballistic skill 5, although they've only got bolt pistols. Now, they come with charnable weapons, and which isn't that great. On a unit, really, you want them to have some good power weapons, so these are 5 points to give them a power weapon or a Phoenix weapon of your choice. If you do that, that makes them 190 points, which is only 10 points less than a unit of Phoenix Terminators, which are basically just better at everything. Really, they're pretty much just better as a unit on their own. They bring the Living Icons rule. They've got an invulnerable save from the Tartaros armor as well. So there's not an awful lot of reason to take these over Phoenix Terminators in a vacuum. What they do though, they have counter attack 1, so if they get charged, that's a nice bonus, but not a huge thing. But they can go in any transport that they want. So they can take a drop pod, they can take a termite assault drill, and this is just on their profile, and most units can't take these. So what's super interesting about these is, even though they're kind of expensive for what they are a unit that you can use to subterranean assault or deep strike just by default out of the box, and that's really what you're paying for them, which is good, because obviously they're very good in combat if they can get there, and they come with built-in ways to get there. They also can spend 25 points to get a surgical augment, just like the Phoenix Terminators can. So these guys are really cool, a little bit on the pricey side, but you can easily drop them and then get them straight into your enemy, at which point they're mostly safe from enemy fire, and they're so good in combat, they're going to beat a lot of things as well, which is good. What I do like about these is, although you can take a Phoenix power weapon with them, which is good, you can also give them power axes, although the models don't have that, and it's maybe not very Emperor's Children-y, so to speak. But what you could also do is give them power axes as well, so you get all the benefits of power axes being a really good weapon, and they still, when they charge, get to strike in that initiative 2-step higher than people who might have bigger weapons than them. So a few ways you can use these. I do think they are quite interesting. I don't think they're the best thing in the world, just because they don't have any way to get into combat, use one of these deep strike options and then assault necessarily, but they do get better when we use them with one of the Rites of War, which we'll talk about later. So the next is the most classic in my opinion, the precursor to the Noise Marines, the Kakophoni. So these are guys using some sonic weapons. They're basically a heavy support squad, except they've got sonic weapons instead of usual heavy support weapons, and some extra bits as well. So first of all, they're leadership 10 and they're fearless, which is awesome. Really good thing to have access to. And they've got these Kakophoni weapons as well. So they're range 36, strength 6, AP 5. They're basically Volkite Culverins. I forget which Volkite weapon's which, but they're 3 shots in assault, strength 6, deflagrate, which is decent. These are 150 points for a unit of 5 though, so a bit more expensive than taking 5-shot Volkite weapons that you would normally get. But in return for that, they do get pinning and shell shock 1, but they get hot. So you basically got a Volkite equivalent gun that also pins people for 150 points, and they also get fearless and leadership 10 as well. Now these guys are good, having access to pinning, especially with shell shock, which is exactly what pinning needs to make it better, is a really good thing. It's quite powerful. They're also assault, so they can move around the battlefield if they need to as well, although with 36-inch range, you're probably not going to want to do that. And with leadership 10 and fearless, no one can pin them or do anything about them. The problem they've got, number one, they're a bit expensive, 150 points, although they're not so expensive you wouldn't use them. But the get hot is really bad on these guys because there are so many dice to hit. So 15 shots from a unit of 5 of these is going to generate you 2 or 3 get hot rolls. So most of the time, you're going to kill one of your own Marines when you shoot for the first time in the battle. And you've got a good chance of killing one every couple of turns thereafter if nobody else shoots you. So that's not great. But on the other hand, if you're buying these guys just for the pin and test, the good thing about them is they're fearless, so your opponent has to wipe them out completely down to the last man. Even the last guy shooting his Assault 3 gun has got a reasonable chance of getting a wound through on an enemy Marine unit and making them take a pin and test. So to take these off the board, your opponent's got to completely clear them, which is really good as well. So I do like these. I do think they're interesting. They give another dimension to the army. You know, you have a pin and weapon that's also good at killing. Space Marines as well. They're a little bit self-destructive and that kind of stuff, and they're a little bit expensive, but they're not so bad that you wouldn't use them, particularly since they are so very Emperor's Children / Slaanesh. So definitely interested in taking a unit of these if I was playing this army. So then we're on to the special characters. Now all the special characters have got one thing in common, really. They're all about duels. The way they're best used for the most part is fighting against enemy characters and beating them in combat, and that's what they're all good at. So you've got Eidolon, who is a guy with a thunder hammer and a jump pack, and his thunder hammer's special rule in that when he charges he goes at his normal initiative, which is like bonkers good because he's striking at strength 8, AP 2, brutal 2, with mastercrafted as well. He's weapon skill 6 and he's initiative 5 by default, so he's probably going to be initiative 6, striking at initiative 6 thanks to the Thousand Suns rules. He's just really powerful. He's 215 points, which is not cheap, but particularly if you give him maybe a bodyguard of some jump pack Salt Marines, or potentially jumping around on his own, if you fancy doing that, a little bit risky, but he can jump around and kill some stuff. He's very powerful though. Getting to strike with a Thunderhammer level weapon at normal initiative, or in his case much higher than normal initiative, is really, really good. He also comes with Sonic Shriekers built in as well, and he's got a weapon called Death Scream, which is the equivalent, although it's rending rather than breaching, it's the equivalent of the Sonic Lance as well. So he's got that pinning template weapon he can shoot into people as well. So he's really good. His Warlord Trait is interesting as well. So his Warlord Trait means he picks a rival unit and he's going to get +1 to hit against that unit for him and the unit he joins. But once they've killed one in a unit, he's also got +1 to wound as well. So that's a really, really big buff too. That means the great majority of the time he's going to be hitting most people on 2s or 3s at worst, wounding them on 2s. Really big buff for the rest of his unit, who are going to have less weapon skill and probably less strength than he's got as well. So really good buff. The only thing it doesn't do is give you a reaction in quite the same way as most Warlord traits do. It means his unit can do any free reaction, but only against the unit he's called his rival. So he is quite good. If you're into that character, if you're into Eidolon as a character and you want to take him, he's very, very much more than playable in your armies as well, which is always good news when you like a character. Then we've got Saul Tarvitz, one of my favourite characters from the Heresy. I think a lot of people's favourite Heresy character as well. Just an absolute genuine hero. Awesome guy. Loyalist only, obviously. He's largely a sort of basic Praetor level guy with a few special rules. So he's got a really good charnable weapon with Rendon 4, which is good. It's also got Duelist Edge 2, which means he's going to be initiative 7 or equivalent 8 on the charge, which means he's going to go before most people and have a reasonable chance of doing quite a lot of damage to them. Maybe not killing them because the weapon doesn't do that much damage though, which is probably his downside. Now, he does also have a Nemesis Bolter, and he's got the Relentless trait as well, like most characters have, which is really interesting because it basically gives you a sniper in your army for free as well. Although if he's with a unit, it might stop that unit shooting, but just an interesting little throw-in, and it's mastercrafted as well, so he's going to hit most things with it, and he might be taking something out, and he's only 155 points, so getting a free sniper in your army as well as all his melee abilities is a nice little throw-in too. He's also got some bonuses versus Emperor's Children, so he's got Preferred Enemy, and he also gets +1 weapon skill strength and toughness versus Emperor's Children, which is not going to be a thing that's going to happen very much at all unless you've got a pre-arranged battle going on where you're fighting Loyalist versus Traitor. Emperor's Children, but it's just like a nice throw-in because he's not really paying any points for that. He's 155 points. Clearly, that's just a fluff thing, and he's pointed appropriately. Lastly is his Warlord trait. His Warlord trait now is very good, and I think this is the reason you really take him. So it's got a few different conditions to activate. Pretty much one of them is generally going to be active all the time, and if none of them are active, it probably means you're beating your opponent, so you maybe don't really even need the buff. But while it is active, everything within 12 of them is Fearless, which is just gigantic, which is massive buff, massive area. Fearless is obviously the absolute best leadership ability. It's just really huge, and he gives you a shooting reaction as well. In my opinion, the best kind of reaction. So he's really good, he's cheap, and he gives you good stuff, and he's a much beloved character from the Heresy as well, so good news for Saul Tarvitz. Then we got Lucius as well. So Lucius is, again, buffed up, weapon skill 7, which is a crazy number for a guy who's not a Primarch. Initiative 6, crazy number again. Really, really good. He's got a choice of weapons, effectively, so he can have the Blade of the Lair if Fulgrim isn't in the army, which means he's 175, so he's 215 points if he's got the Blade of the Lair, so he's going to be Strength 4, AP 2, but it's Fleshbane, Mastercrafted, and it's got Duelist Edge 1 as well, so pretty good weapon as long as you're trying, well, a great weapon as long as you're trying to kill people. You can also reduce him down to 175 points, and instead he'll be using his 19 weapon in melee, which is Rendon 3+, only his normal strength, but it's Duelist Aegis 1, so +1 weapon skill that's going to give you if you're in a duel. It's also Murderous Strike 6 as well. So in a lot of ways, actually, I think his weapon's better than the Blade of the Lair, because although it's not AP2, it's Rendon 3, and that also means because he's Strength 4, he's going to wound high toughness things like Dreadnoughts, for example, on a 3 as well. And then he's got that +1 weapon skill in a duel, which makes him weapon skill 8, which is, you know, even versus a Primarch, he's going to give them a good fight. And it's going to instant death on a 6 as well. So I'm not really sure why you wouldn't take this over the Blade of the Lair and an extra 340 points. I think this is very good. He's also got +1 attack if his initiative characteristic is higher than his opponent's, which at initiative 6 it will be most of the time as well. So his Warlord trait's a little bit of a double-edged sword. So his Warlord trait means that he's fearless in a challenge, and so is his entire unit if he's in a challenge as well, which is really good. But you can't use his leadership, which is like the downside. So if you were taking your Praetor as Lucius for his leadership reasons, you can't use it, which is quite a big downside, because you do want that leadership 10. And the first reaction you use by his unit every turn doesn't take up a reaction allowance point, which is really good, because it's like your standard +1 reaction for your Warlord trait, but it actually just works with any phase, so it's really good. So I think Lucius is good. 215 points, again, he is pricey, but he's very, very good in combat. Anything short of a Primarch is going to have no chance against him in combat. Speaking of Primarchs, let's mention, last but by no means least, Fulgrim. He's got a lot of special rules. He's basically the best Primarch in melee, in my opinion. It's pretty close at the top, really, for melee Primarchs, but he's basically the best Primarch in melee. He gets extra attacks based on his initiative compared to the person he's fighting, so he's generally going to have the most attacks out of any, Primarch when he's fighting. He's also comes with Crusader and Sudden Strike. Now, most Primarchs don't have any extra USR special rules, really, but these two are both really good on him. So he's getting +1 initiative on the charge from Sudden Strike, which is really good, and he's also getting to reroll his sweep and advance rolls as well. So if you are fighting something where you're not necessarily going to wipe the unit out, you're definitely going to beat them. You're almost definitely going to catch them when you beat them and they run away as well. So those are really nice extra things. Also, his weapon as well is maybe slightly worse than some of the better Primarch weapons, because it hasn't got sudden death, but he can easily be very high initiative in a duel and getting 2-3 extra attacks, or if he's fighting against, normal mortal enemies, getting maybe +4 or 5 attacks. So that really makes up for that lack of sudden death as well. And then his Sire ability, his Warlord trait, makes everyone leadership 10, and also gives them everybody +1 to the results in all of their combats. And again, that does stack with living icons, so that's really powerful. So if you've got living icons and a Vexilla and this, your unit's at +3 to its combat results, and it gives you the first reaction every turn is free for his unit as well in any phase. And all of those rules are battlefield wide as well, so just blanket everyone on the board, +1 to all your combat results is really good. So I really like Fulgrim. He's also a little bit cheaper than a lot of the Primarchs. I think he's does what he does well. He's the most fighty Primarch, I think. I think he's going to beat most other Primarchs in a Primarch duel as well, which is an important thing to know about, because a lot of games with Primarchs do descend into them just having a fight and seeing which one wins. And I think he's going to win more often than not against most Primarchs as well. So quite powerful and a great thing to have access to for your army as well if you want to use them. So finally, let's talk about the Rites of War that Emperor's Children get access to. Now, the first one of these is called the Maruskara, which is the perfect cut translated. Thanks, book. So, up to 4 units of elite troops or fast attack units that you've taken in your army that aren't heavy, slow, or bombards can outflank, which is really good. Also, as well, you don't need to make reserve rolls for units that deploy from flank or subterranean assault. Now note that doesn't mention deep strike, so subterranean assault or outflanking you don't need to make reserve rolls for, and for a unit to get it. That's massive. That's absolutely incredible. It's like a huge benefit to your army, especially when you've got lots of melee units that you want to get into combat as well. And just generally reserves are quite powerful, but the downside is those reserve rolls and you just don't have it, so they're just coming on when you want them as well. Also as well, until you've deployed units from reserves, including deep strike this time, everything in your army gets +1 move, which is also good, and a lot of units will be pushed up to 8 move from that, which gives them +1 to their charge rolls too, which is really good for getting into combat. Now the downsides of this is you can't have any movement 0 units or slow or bombard units, which we're fine with generally because we won't be using much of them anyway, and you can't assign more than half of your units to flank or subterranean assault, and you've got to take a Legion Champion or a Phoenix Warden as well, which is not a problem because, as we said before, the Phoenix Warden's really good anyway, so that's a downside. Now this is just so good for Emperor's Children. As a melee focused army that doesn't have any particularly special or interesting ways to get stuff into combat, being able to get those free outflanks is great, but then being able to just not roll as well on top of that, and giving all your other guys +1 move at the same time until you deploy them is just so good for so little downside. And I'm going to just come back to the Palatine Blades. One of the problems with the Palatine Blades is, although they get access to those termites or drop pods, they can't assault the turn they turn up from those, but they can assault the turn they turn up from outflank. So if you're taking the Maruskara, it also makes your Palatine Blades better as well, because they can outflank, turn up whatever turn you want them to, maybe ideally when the opponent's got something high value near a board edge, and they just turn up and then they go and charge, which is great. So really good Rite of War, that, and one that I think you will just take by default most of the time, unless you've got another Rite of War in mind. The other Rite of War is a bit more specialised. This is the 3rd Company Elite. So this does a couple of things. Firstly, it lets you take Kakophoni as troops, which is okay. I don't think we generally have a problem fitting Kakophoni into our lists anyway, but that's what that does. But it means you can take surgical augments on any of your units for 30 points per unit, so the whole unit gets a surgical augments. The downside is you have to take surgical augments on any character. So effectively, given most units have a character in them, you've basically got to take surgical augments on everything in the army to get this. Now this is kind of good. When you think about them Sonic Lancers with template weapons, if you imagine a unit of 20 attack marines, or with flamer templates that breach on a 6 and cause pinning for 30 points, that's quite a big upgrade. Likewise, if you're going to take the Sonic Shriekers upgrade for 30 points, you're not getting any extra benefit from it being on the whole unit, but it means that the unit's got it even if the sergeant dies, which does then mean you can do the Artificer armor trick or other stuff as well. So this is quite a good thing to have access to as well, just being able to put all those on all of your different units as well, and it really ups the sort of usage you get out of those Sonic Lancers as well. So it's not I don't think it's a particularly incredible thematic thing, and I don't think it makes the army much more exciting than it is already. But, you know, if that's what you want to do, particularly you might be into modelling these things, or you might just have particular affinity for the third company, this might be a thing you want to take. It's certainly a good thing if you want to take it. So, putting all this together, all these things we've talked about, all the things that the Emperor's Children do, what is the theme of the army? Like, how do all these things add up? Well, the theme of the army obviously is going first in melee and all the advantages that come with that. So everything that they do, the reach on their weapons, the +1 initiative step when they fight, incentivizes you to make the most out of that. Also as well, they've also got like a sub-theme of winning combats by combat result. So they got lots of different ways to get pluses to their combat result. And also as well, they've got ways to make themselves tougher in combat with the -1 to hit, and with also the swordsmanship abilities as well. So in theory, you could try to win combats by just your bonuses alone and making sure the opponent doesn't kill you. So they're quite good at not dying in combat as well in a lot of situations. Another couple of sub-themes. So also got a fair bit of pinning in the army, which not every army gets access to. So they've got the Sonic Shriekers and also the Kakophoni as well, which is, you know, good access to some pinning. And also quite a few ways to get Fearless or Fearless equivalent with the Broken Mirror Warlord trait as well. So a few different things going on there. So the advantages that adds up to for Emperor's Children is they're good at winning combats. They're not necessarily the best at killing things in combat, because I think that goes to, you know, other legions who are better at just outright killing stuff, but they're good at winning combats. And ultimately, even if you lose more wounds than the opponent, if you still win the combat, that's the biggest deal. You know, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to win these combats most of the time and make the other person run away and wipe their unit out. In elites versus elites fights, obviously that's less important, because a lot of the time things are stubborn and they'll stay in the combat, but they have got then the ability to leverage their going first against most other elites to try to just grind the opponent down by always going first before they do, and reducing their ability to strike back, which is a really good thing as well. Against other melee focused armies, unit for unit, so just taking elites out of the equation, let's say we're fighting Assault Marines versus Assault Marines, or Tactical Marines versus Tactical Marines, going first in a combat is usually going to win the combat. So of all the melee focused armies that you've got, you know, you've got Sons of Horus, you've got Blood Angels, you've got Space Wolves, World Eaters, all the different bonuses they get are normally focused on making your dice better through more attacks or bonuses to wound or whatever it is, whereas Emperor's Children are just going to go first. So even though the other person might be better at combat, you're going to go first. They're going to lose models before you. That will usually win you the combat in most circumstances, assuming the dice are equal, which they never are, but that is their advantage. That's the thing you really want to press. And they've got multiple sources of pinning as well, as we just mentioned, and there are lots of ways to leverage that, whether that's by trying to shoot, you know, as your guys go in to fight who they want to, you can shoot the other person's combat units so they can't, you know, counter-strike against you in their turn if you manage to pin them. You can pin down their big guns so they're not shooting your melee guys on the way into melee. It's nice to have access to sources of pinning in this game, because pinning is really good. What are the Emperor's Children's disadvantages? Well, they got no benefits to shooting, other than the +1 to defensive fire for vehicles, but that doesn't really count. No benefits to shooting, and shooting is generally still king in, you know, Warhammer games, so they got no benefits to shooting whatsoever, and no extra defenses against shooting either. The special units choices versus other special unit choices for other armies in melee can actually just lose out on quality of attacks as well. So even though we're going first, even though we've got those Rendon different types of weapons, you know, the Phoenix power weapons and that kind of stuff, a lot of the time other person's elites will be getting their saving throws against your elites, and even if you're going first, that still means they're going to beat you just by quality of attacks as well. So that can be a problem. So you're really going to have to dictate your engagements. You know, you don't want your Phoenix Terminators necessarily fighting against other people's 2+ save Terminators, because they just beat you on having better attacks even if you are faster than them, which is a cool thing. I think is actually sort of the way it should work. You know, the Emperor's Children are better, faster, but they haven't necessarily got the big, clumsy, but more powerful weapons other people have got. And also, as well, the special choices in this army are a little bit on the expensive side outside of the Phoenix Terminators as well. So some of the Special characters are a little bit on the pricey side, but certainly the Kakophoni and the Palatine Blades are a little bit expensive for what you get as well. So how do we get the most out of putting all these things together? Well, firstly, I think to say the Maruskara Rite of War is very good. Granting outflank to a bunch of stuff, particularly when you can auto pass the outflank roll when you want, is just a great way of getting these powerful combat units into combat. And whether you use that for Palatine Blades or whether you use it for other things, like good candidates for this, for example, are things like Saber tanks. So they've got a really good gun. They are not heavy, so they are allowed to outflank. They're a fast attack choice, is a really good way of leveraging this to give something outflank that it didn't before. The Maruskara basically helps you do what your army wants to do, which is fight things in combat with your guys. You obviously want to focus this army on leverage and melee. So outside of the special units, good ways to leverage melee are just tactical marines with chain bayonets, charging the enemy. As I said, you know, pound for pound, going first will normally win. And if you can get the charges off with your tacticals into the enemy, you've got a really good chance of doing a lot of damage first. You can also put Sonic Shriekers on the Sergeant in that unit as well, so when you do get hit back, they're -1 to hit you back as well. They're just really good combat units when you equip them. Also, Terminators with unwieldy weapons, or anyone with power axes generally, getting that +1 extra initiative step fight is very good. So if you've got a bunch of Cataphracti or maybe Tartaros so that you can sweep when you win the combats, particularly if you're using the retinue versions of them where they're weapon skill 5, you can put lots of those unwieldy weapons on them and you can go and fight other people's unwieldy Terminators and you're going to go first every time. Same effect as everything else in the army. If they've got a bunch of guys with power fists or thunderhammers or whatever, and so have you, even if theirs are a bit better, like they're specialists, they got some special rules, just daring or something like that, yours are going to go first and you're going to kill a bunch of stuff first. So definitely don't sleep on not using the special units and just using the normal units in the army and really leveraging those initiative bonus and how good the Sonic Shriekers are in combat as well. Definitely try to get some living icons in your list though. The Phoenix Terminators are great. The special console is also great, just for that bubble of living icons. Really helps all the units nearby. It is only a small bubble, so the guy's probably going to have to be in combat, but he's a great duelist anyway, so that's not a problem. Also, on the topic of duelists, make sure you are leveraging duels. There's a lot of bonuses in this army for dueling, and we are going to try to win a lot of combats on the combat result rather than killing the models. So if you can get your superior duelists into combat with the enemies, sergeants and that kind of stuff, and just kill them. Number one, you eliminate the sergeant, or maybe the apothecary or something like that if your opponent doesn't have any choice but to throw them in maybe. But also as well, at the same time, you just push that combat result. You just really push that combat result up by all those excess wounds, and you just win, and then you just try and sweep people off the table, which is great. Survivability in combats is a good thing, so -1 to hit you. The Sonic Shriekers are almost like a great army-wide special rule in themselves. You can use your guys in such a way as it's just hard to kill, especially when you've got your Palatine Blades or your Phoenix Terminators. They can use that defensive stance. They got Sonic Shriekers as well on top of that, and you're going to maybe kill 1 or 2 of their guys before they go. You can actually just make yourself really hard to kill in melee, which is an interesting thing to be able to do. Most armies don't have the option to do that. You just both roll your dice and fight and see who wins. So having some control over the way that works is also good. And coming into that, if you're going to use units with skill unmatched, as I mentioned before, you really need to learn when the best times are to use the different stances in that to get the most out of them, to make sure that you're either killing the most enemy models you can or trying to win the combat, depending on what's most important at the time. All this said, Emperor's Children, great in melee, great at will in combat, all this kind of stuff. No particularly great ways to deal with tanks or dreadnoughts. So you are going to have to make sure you've got ways to do that. Now, you can also do this in melee, obviously, with things like chain fists, for example, but that alone is unlikely to do enough for you against someone who brings a lot of these things, particularly if they're dreadnoughts where they can fight back as well and punch a bunch of your guys to death while they're doing it. So you are going to need to bring some guns. Make sure you're backing your guys up with enough guns. The other thing is as well, you do want to force the opponent to come and have to fight you. If you just take too much melee in your army, if someone's got superior firepower to you, even if they're maybe not a shooting focused army. They can dictate the way the game goes, and that's bad for you because you want them to have to come and fight you. You know, you don't want them to have all the time in the world to pick your army apart with guns before they have to engage and then just overwhelm your guys. So make sure you bring enough guns in support of your army. The Maruskara can really help here, as I said before. You can outflank all sorts of things. You can outflank sabers, which are really good with the snub-nose autocannons. You can outflank guys with melter bombs is an interesting one because you can choose when they turn up as well as a cool thing you can do. You can obviously just outflank things with melter guns or things with weapons they can shoot. You can also outflank without the Maruskara, so things like javelins are really good because they can outflank naturally or deep strike as well. So that kind of stuff, you've got to bring ways to deal with the enemy big stuff because a lot of your melee units won't, and you won't have a good game if you've brought all this great stuff but the opponent just brings tanks and you've got nothing to fight anyway. Dreadnoughts are likewise good for you as well. They do get the Legion bonus, so if you've got 2 Dreadnoughts, your Dreadnoughts are going to strike before the enemy Dreadnoughts, which a lot of the time might not kill them, but particularly if they've brought like a Chain Fist or something, you could easily kill an enemy Dreadnought with those instant death D3 wound damages as well. You're going to go first, and they can also bring guns. They can be a support platform for your guys. What I really like Dreadnoughts for is sticking with a unit, like sticking with a big unit of tacticals or something like that, marching up the battlefield, providing some fire support with the multi-melters or las cannons, and having that fist to get stuck in and bring the heavy hitting melee when the other units are getting stuck in, and just in case they need to fight something that's a bit tougher than usual. Also as well, just filling your army up with cheap heavy weapons is a good way to do it. So heavy weapon squads with las cannons, predators with las cannon sponsons, all those kind of things as well can really make sure that you actually get to play with your melee toys. So that's everything. That's a review of all of the Emperor's Children things and lots of discussion on the tactics that you can use to make sure you get the most out of your army on the tabletop. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do leave me some comments and like and subscribe to the channel. Always love to see the support and always happy to have chats with you guys about absolutely anything whatsoever. I'm going to leave you with a quote from Fulgrim, as if it would be anything else. Fulgrim's got some fantastic quotes, and the Emperor's Children generally are like the most tragic of the legions, I think, because they were so good and so great, and turning into bad guys, you know, slipping into chaos, for them was not something they saw coming. It was like an accident because of, you know, the way they were, the way they acted, etc. And I just really love everything about them. They're so cool. So here's Fulgrim's quote to close us out. "Look at them, my sons. You are the highest, and they the lowest. It is your duty to raise them up as high as they will go. Anything less is not worthy of you." Bye-bye.